everyone, so this is Future Atousa in the editing process, and if you watched the first part of this video, you will know that I decided to chop this really long video into two parts. As you can tell by the title, this is the second part, and in this video I'm going to be talking about kinesthetic, mathematical, social and solitary learning styles. But if you are interested in part one, which speaks about visual, auditory and verbal learning styles, then the link to that will be below. And guys, if you find these videos useful and you would like to support me by either purchasing art from my Etsy or supporting me on Patreon, then links to those will also be below. Alright, enjoy! Mwah! The fourth learning style is kinesthetic or physical, and this is where you prefer to use your body, hands and also your sense of touch when it comes to studying. Again, I have got four methods for this learning style. The first one is using cue cards. I know this is a really popular method that a lot of people use anyway, just because it's easy to have, exactly what you need to learn with maybe Q&As or something like that to have at hand. But this is really good for kinesthetic learners because you literally get to feel and hold what you're learning. And if you are this kind of learner and you do engage with the information through your hands or a sense of touch, physically playing around with the information you need to learn can be really useful. The second method is to stick information all around your room. But unlike the visual learners, where you kind of just look at it and try and take the information in, the reason why I recommend sticking information around your room is so that you can move around from, for example, stations that you've set up in your house or in your room, and get your body moving as you're reading this information. I know that sometimes it can be quite difficult for kinesthetic learners to just sit still and, just read, because for them that can get quite boring. So if you do have, for example, books or paragraphs scattered around your house, just the act of moving from one place to the next and, like reading a book at the dining room table and then walking over to like your living room and then taking notes, or something along these lines where it just literally physically gets you moving, is a really good way to get kinesthetic learners engaged in the information that they're trying to learn. And also, it's always lovely to be able to stay active when you're studying. The third method is when you're trying to understand a complicated process, like, for example, if you're trying to understand how DNA replicates, you can literally use your hands to make shapes and gestures that go along with the information that you're trying to learn. So let's say if you're trying to learn about DNA replication, you can be like, well, the DNA's together, and then it kind of unwinds like this, and then you've got the bases. You get the point. But depending on the kind of information that you're trying to learn, you could sometimes even just draw it out like with your hands like this, or make shapes as you're thinking. And again, that's just another really good way to get kinesthetic learners engaged with their information. But I would recommend not doing this in public, because if you're sat there and like you're just doing this with your hands and then like talking out loud, people will start thinking you're crazy, and you probably don't want that. Finally, method number 4 involves creating and acting out roles. Again, I think this is a fun way for any kind of learner to use, but I think it works specifically well for kinesthetic learners, because if you write the information that you have to learn either as like a play or in a context of like a conversation, and you get somebody else to have that conversation with you, because you're physically acting out and moving around and, engaging with the information physically again in that sense, it's a really good way to try and retain the information. The fifth learning style is logical or mathematical. And this is where you prefer using logic, reasoning or systems when it comes to your studying. For logical or mathematical learners, it's always very, very important to understand how something works and not just why it is the way it is. And let's be honest, while I feel like all of us should fully understand what it is that we're learning, because of maybe lack of time or for whatever other reasons, sometimes we tend to just memorize something and think, okay, well, I know that this is the answer, I don't need to know why. And while that works great for a lot of people, visual learners, for example, when it comes to logical or mathematical learners, in order for them to really understand and remember something, they need to physically understand the processes behind why it works. So my biggest recommendation here would be that if you are a logical learner and you are just not grasping something, or for example, you just cannot remember a certain something, try and delve a bit more deeply into it, and maybe by uncovering the mechanisms of how something works, then you will just remember what it is on a surface level. The second really useful method, which again works across all different types of learners, but specifically for you guys, using checklists is really important. Because logical learners tend to do things systematically, by creating a checklist of exactly what they need to do and then checking it off as they go along, this kind of creates a system for their revision. So again, very systematic. And although it does seem like a bit of a chore to have to sit and write a checklist and follow it across and all of that kind of stuff, but for a mathematical learner, this is a really good way. And it makes sure that you stay super organized, which is definitely a good thing. The third method is strategizing what you need to learn by putting everything into categories. So to give you an example of this, and I think, oh, I just dropped a pen. So to give you an example of this, and I used a similar example in my last video, is, for example, if you have to learn how do viruses cause respiratory diseases, what you could do as a logical learner is categorize it into chunks. So firstly, you could say, okay, how does the lung work normally? Then you can have another category of what are the kind of viruses that affect the lung, and then you can have the third category of what happens when the lung and the viruses meet and how does disease come about. This method makes sure that you've got everything into bite-sized pieces, and it also means that you don't skip anything. The sixth learning style is social or interpersonal, and this is the kind of learning style where you prefer learning and studying with other people. For this style, it is great to find other people in your class or on your course and get everybody together and maybe make cue cards and ask each other questions, or just have open discussions where you talk about the work that you need to learn. This is also especially good if you are partly an auditory learner as well, because if you can associate something that your friend has said and you remember what they've said, then assuming what they've said is correct, then that's also a really good way for you to learn and engage with information. The second method for social learners is creating presentations and giving the presentations to your friends or family members, or literally whoever's willing to sit down and listen. Lastly, and again I mentioned this for another one of the learning styles, and it is acting out role plays. Again, this is great for social learners if you have other social learners on your course or in your class, because if you guys all come together, then you can sit out and write a script, and so everybody has a character or everybody has a chunk of information to contribute, and then you can just all learn together. And you know what, I just think that sounds like a lot of fun. Finally, last but not least, the seventh learning style is a solitary learner. And this is where you prefer to work alone or use self-study methods when it comes to your revision. Personally for me, as much as I enjoy the social aspects of learning, I can't really engage with the material too much when I'm in a large group of people. Despite being a massive extrovert, when it comes to my work, I really like to have my own space. So my number one method to really try and help you take in the information is create a study spot. And this should be a spot where you know that you're going to get disturbed the least. And when you have this spot, it's always good to, maybe stick up motivational posters or quotes, or, create a little study den for yourself, and make sure that whenever you do your work, you go to this particular place. The second method is, again, creating presentations. But unlike social learners where you create presentations with the aim or the goal of presenting it to somebody, as a solitary learner, you should create presentations with the thought that you're only creating it for you and that nobody else is going to see it. I generally tend to think that the process of turning the things that you need to learn into a presentation is just overall a good way to become engaged with your content. And the other good thing about doing this, as opposed to presenting it to other people, is that sometimes when you're presenting to other people as somebody who prefers to study alone, that in itself can become quite distracting. And the third method, and I've saved this till last because I think this is very important for all learners, but it works especially for social learners, and that is, when you are studying, have a little journal next to you where you write down areas that you struggle with. And you know what? It doesn't even have to be areas that you struggle with. Just have a piece of paper or a study journal next to you that whenever there is a question that comes up, write it down immediately and then later on go on to ask teachers or do some research yourself. So yes, if you do decide to do this, just make sure that you put like a reminder on your phone or something to go back to it later. So I said this at the beginning and I will say it again. People don't always fall into one category. In fact, you might even be 3 of these or even 4 of these. So just try and figure out what is good for you and go with that. And I'm sure that you're going to do great. And guys, as I said, if you enjoyed this video and you would like to support me, I will leave my Patreon below. Until next time guys, I hope you're doing great. I wish you the best of luck with revision. Try not to stress because I know that's the kind of advice that I need to be given a lot of the times. But yes, I hope you're all doing well, and if you have any other questions that you would like to leave, then by all means do so in the comments below. Until next time guys, have a wonderful day and I will speak to you later.